Hilchos Tefillah Perek Shlishi. The Laws of Prayer, Chapter 3. Today, we have two topics. First of all, Zmanei HaTefillah, the proper times of davening. And second, Hashlamot HaTefillah, what to do if you missed a davening, how to make it up. So I printed this paper again, a little bit updated. This is the paper of Zmanim, okay? Halachic times. Now here's how it works. The main times that you have to look at is always Netzach Hama and Shkia, sunrise and sunset. Once you know the times of sunrise and sunset, then you divide the time between them in 12. So today on the clock we look at hours as 60 minutes. In Halakha we have what's called Sha'ot Zmaniyot, which means proportional hours. You take the time of sunrise and the time of sunset, you divide the time between them into 12, and then you fill in all the other times. So Sof Zman Kriyat Shema is a quarter into the day, 3 hours. Doesn't mean 3 times 60 minutes. It means 3/12. 3 portions of 12 into the day is Kriyat Shema. Sof Zman Tefillah, that's what we're going to learn about today, is 1/3 of the day, 4 hours into the day. Again, not 4 times 60 minutes, it means 4 times, 4/12 of whatever the time between sunrise and sunset. Then we have Chatzot, that's midday. And once you hit midday, and again, midday means the mid-moment between sunrise and sunset. So if sunrise is at 6 o'clock and sunset is at 6 o'clock, that's easy. 12 o'clock is midday. But if sunrise is 5:30 and sunset is 6:30, now you have 13 hours of daylight. So the midpoint is going to be 12:30. Right?
Do we have two chatzot?
So we have only a halachic chatzot. Halachic chatzot means that the moment of time between sunrise and sunset. And then you take a half an hour, a half of that proportional hour, and you have what's called mincha gedolah. The earliest time to daven mincha is a half an hour after chatzot.
But it changes every day.
It changes every day because the half hour is not a clock hour. It's a proportional hour. Every day the days are getting shorter or longer. Then you have what's called mincha ktana, the later mincha, which is 3 hours later. 9.5 hours into the day. This was 6.5 hours, 9.5 hours into the day. Then you have what's called plag ha-mincha, which means halftime. It's half of mincha. And it's half of the time between mincha ktana and sunset. So it's an hour and a quarter before sunset, then you have sunset. So we daven mincha literally right before sunset. So it's after plag ha-mincha. We daven like before. But for example, on Erev Shabbat, when we take in Shabbos early, the earliest you can do is this time. The earliest you can light candles is over here.
What time is that?
Every week depends, different places, but it's an hour and a quarter proportionally before sunset. Okay, so today we're not going to discuss the dawn and the nightfall. That's out of the picture. I mean, it's going to come up in the halachot, but the bottom line is we're looking at sunrise, sunset, and that's how we're deciding when to daven. Okay, let's see how we go. Perek Shlishi Halacha Aleph. Tfilat HaShachar, the morning prayer. Mitzvata sheyatchili hitpalel im hanetzach hama. The mitzvah is, the ideal way to do it is to begin the prayers with sunrise. We saw before, you reach Kriyat Shema a couple of minutes before sunrise, you finish with sunrise, Ga'al Yisrael, boom, at sunrise, you're starting Shmoneh Esrei. Uzmana, but the time continues, ad sof sha'ar revi'it, till the end of the 4th hour, shehi shlishit hayom, which is a third of the day. Doesn't mean 4 clock hours, it means a third of the daylight. Look, you see over here, sof zman tefillah is 1/3 of the day. If you transgressed, you didn't care, you went till later, or you made a mistake, and you daven v'itpalel achar arba, after 4 hours, ad chatzot hayom, till midday, yatsa yedei chovat tefillah, you have fulfilled the obligation to daven, aval lo yatsa yedei chovat tefillah bizmana, but you didn't fulfill the obligation of davening in the proper time, because you missed the time. Shekashem shet tefillah, mitzvah min haTorah, the same way the actual davening is a biblical mitzvah, kach mitzvah midivreihem, lehitpalel ota bizmana. So too it's a rabbinic mitzvah to daven in the right time, kemoshe tiknu lanu chachamim u'neviim, as our sages and the prophets have enacted to us. So it's up till the 4th hour, till a third of the day, which is the 4th hour. Why'd they pick that time? Because prayers are corresponding to sacrifices. And the korban tamid shel shachar in the Bet HaMikdash, the morning sacrifice, could be brought latest till 4 hours. Halacha bet. That's for the morning. Now for the afternoon. Kvar amarnu, we've already said, shetfilat hamincha keneged tamid shel ben ha'arbayim tiknu zmana. that the mincha prayer, the afternoon prayer, was enacted to correspond to the Tamid Shel Ben HaArbaim, to the afternoon daily sacrifice. When was the afternoon sacrifice brought? Ulefisha haya hatamid karev b'chol yom b'tesha sha'ot umechetza. Every single day, the korban tamid was sacrificed 9.5 hours into the day. So you count from sunrise, 9 proportional hours and a half. That's when they brought the korban tamid. So therefore, tiknu zmana mitesha sha'ot umechetza. Originally, the rabbis enacted that the time of daven mincha is from 9.5 hours into the day until sunset. V'hi nikrat mincha ktana. That's called the small mincha, or the later mincha. However, there was one time a year when they brought the afternoon sacrifice earlier. Ulefisha be'erev haPesach, shechal liyot be'erev Shabbat. If the eve of Pesach came out to be on Friday, like last year, I believe, right? Erev Pesach was on Friday. Pesach started on Shabbat, and Erev Pesach was Erev Shabbat. So in that case, hayu shochatin et hatamid b'shesh sha'ot umechetza. They used to slaughter the afternoon sacrifice the earliest possible time. As soon as the sun was no longer in the middle of the sky, it was already leaning towards the sunset, 6.5 hours into the day, they sacrificed it. Why? Because on Erev Pesach, you have to bring all the Korban Pesach of all the Jewish people. And plus it's Erev Shabbat, so you have no time to carry it home later on in the day. On holiday, typically you can carry. But, and you also have to roast it before Shabbat. So here you have a problem. So they used to sacrifice the Korban Tamid as early as possible and begin the Pesach right away. So it wasn't even once a year, it was once every couple of years. But there was a time that they used to bring the Tamid on 6.5 hours. So Amru, the sages said, that if you pray Mincha after 6.5 hours, Yatsa, you fulfill your obligation. The moment this time arrives is when the obligation for Mincha arrives. That's called the big Mincha. So you see over here, you have Chatzot, you have midday. Half an hour afterwards is the early Mincha, Mincha Gedolah. And then 3 hours later is the ideal Mincha, Mincha Ktana. Okay. Halacha Gimel. Nahagu anashim harbe. Because of these two times, many people had the custom, lehitpalel Gedolah uktana. They pray twice Mincha every day. Once earlier, once later, v'ha'achat reshut. And one of them they look at as optional. One of them is like the obligation, one of them is the optional. It says the Rambam, if you do that, v'haru miktzat ha'geonim, some of the geonim say, they ruled, she'ein ra'oi lehitpalel reshut ela ha'gedolah. That you should, in your mind, you should have in mind, which one am I doing as the optional one, the earlier one? V'chen hadin noten. And it actually makes sense, because mipnei shehi keneged davar she'enot hadir b'chol yom. Davening mincha earlier is corresponding to something which is not frequent every day. In the Beit HaMikdash, they didn't bring the afternoon sacrifice so early every day. It was very unusual. So if you're davening twice mincha, the first one, which is the unusual one, you should daven with the intent that it's only an option. But if you did have in mind that you daven the first one as an obligation, lo yitpalel ktana ela reshut. You should only daven the second time in the later part of the afternoon with the intent that it's going to be like optional. But today we only do once. So either you do early or later, it's all the same, but we don't do twice. Halacha dalet. Halamadata. So here we learn, shezman mincha gedolah, that the early mincha goes, mishesh sha'ot u'mechetza ad tesha sha'ot u'mechetza, from 6.5 hours to 9.5 hours into the day. Uzman mincha ktana, but when does the later mincha go? It goes mi tesha sha'ot u'mechetza, from 9.5 hours, ad sheyisha'er min hayom sha'a u'reviya, till what's called plag mincha, the halftime. Here, till you have an hour and a quarter before sunset. That's the idea. You're supposed to daven between here and here. But you couldn't daven mincha until sunset. Today, many people do that lechatchila. We do that initially, we daven right before sunset. But in the Rambam's book, it seems like that there was some opinion that you should only daven until plaga mincha. And that's because in the Talmud, there's an opinion that says that the nighttime begins at plaga mincha. Rabbi Yehuda says you can daven arvit already from plaga mincha, which is why we follow his opinion on Erev Shabbat. When you daven early on 6:30 minyan, up here every Friday, during the summertime, that's who we're following. We're following the opinion that you can take in arvit earlier from Plaga Mincha. You still say Shema later, because we're going to see in a second. Halacha hey, Tfilat HaMusafim. What about Musaf? When there's a Musaf prayer, Rosh Chodesh, Shabbat, holidays. Zmana achar Tfilat HaShachar ad sheva shaot bayom. The time to daven Musaf is from after the morning davening till 7 hours into the day, because in the Beit HaMikdash they used to bring the sacrifice till 7 hours. V'mitpalel ota achar sheva shaot. If you daven Musaf after 7 hours, afal pisha pasha, even though you're considered negligent, yatsa yedei chovato, you have fulfilled your obligation. Because really its time is all day. You could technically bring the Musaf sacrifice all day in the temple also, so you can daven all day. Halacha vav. Tfilat ha'erev, the evening prayer. Afal pi she'eina chova, even though it's not obligatory, we said yesterday, all the Jewish people accepted it upon themselves as an obligation, but initially it's not an obligation. Hamitpalel ota, when you daven, arvit, zmana mitchilat halayla, ad sheyale amud hashachar. The time is from the beginning of the night till the next morning at dawn. Utfilat ni'ilah, when we have the ni'ilah prayer, like on Yom Kippur, zmana, the time of ni'ilah, there's no beginning time. It's kedeshi yashlimota samuch lishkat hachama. You have to time it so you finish before sunset. You figure out when sunset is, and you time it, and you start early enough to finish just before sunset. Halacha zayin. Hamitpalel tefillah kodem zmana. What happens if you daven a davening before the time? After the time, we understand. You missed it. Before the time, you have work very early in the morning. You want to daven shacharit before sunrise. Lo yatsa yedei chovato v'chozeru mitpalel ota bizmana. You didn't fulfill your obligation. You have to go back and daven again in the proper time. However, v'im mitpalel tfilat shacharit bishat hadchak achar sha'ala amud hashachar. If you daven the morning prayer in the time of pressure after dawn, yatsa, then you fulfill your obligation. Some people that go to work every day, that's what they rely on. They say, you know what, it's a time of pressure, I have to get out to work, I have to daven early, so we should daven after dawn. But ideally, you daven after sunrise. V'yesh lo lehitpalel tfilat arvit shel lilei Shabbat be'erev Shabbat, kodem shetishka hachama. On Friday night, like we do, you can daven arvit early, while it's still erev Shabbat, before sunset. And here's what we don't do. V'chen yitpalel arvit shel motzai Shabbat b'Shabbat. You can daven Motzei Shabbat Arvit while it's still Shabbat. The commentaries say it's only if it's a pressing situation. If there's a mitzvah going on, you have to bury somebody, or you're preparing for a wedding or something big. And anyway, today most commentators say that we don't do that. We wait for Shabbat to come out. But technically, in the Rambam's time, you can daven Arvit of Shabbat, of Motzei Shabbat, while it's still Shabbat. Why? Lefi shetfilat Arvit reshut en medaktikin bizmana. Because Ma'ariv is optional, we don't be precise in its time. But that's all provided that you're going to read Shema again at nighttime when it's after the stars come out. If you were doing the Arvit of Motzei Shabbat?
No, yeah. I mean, if you're doing Arvit, if you
no, you can't. You can't.
You can't say that then, right? You have to leave that out.
You know what? It says over here that, you do. It says you do say Atachon Antanu, but you still can't do work until after the stars come out.
Wow.
That's what it says here. You have to say the Havdalah prayers, but you cannot do work until the stars come out. Okay, so that was all the first part of the chapter, Zmanei HaTfilah, the times of davening. Now let's talk about what happens if you missed a davening. Halacha chet. Kol mi she'avar alav zman tfilah, v'lo yitpalel. Any person who the time of davening passed by him, and he didn't daven. Bimezid, if he did it purposefully, defiantly, en lo takana ve'eno mishalem, or mashlim. You have no way to fix it, you can't pay it up, you can't rectify it. Bishogeg, but if you missed it inadvertently, o shahaya, anus, o tarud, or you were beyond your control, or way busy, and you couldn't daven on time, mishalem, or mashlim ota, tfilah, bizman tfilah smuchala. You make up, or you pay up the davening that you missed at the time of the next davening. Umakdim tfilah shebizmana ve'achareha mitpalel tashlumin. In your mind's eye, you have to always see the first one you're doing is the proper davening, and then second is the one you're making up for in the past. It's so extreme that the commentaries say that if you had in mind the other way around, it doesn't count. So if you did the first one for the makeup and the second one for the tefillah in its proper time, you have to daven a third one to make up.
What if you read to say that one also? Let's say someone makes Shacharis.
Oh, let's see. Okay, we'll see. Halacha tet. Ketzat. How do we apply this? What does this mean? Ta'a v'lo yitpalel shacharit. You made a mistake. You didn't daven the morning prayer. Ve'avar chatzi hayom. And half day passes. So now it's after the time of tefillah. Yitpalel mincha shtayim. You daven mincha shmona esrei twice. Rishona tfilat mincha. The first one as the mincha service. V'hashniya tashlumei shacharit. And the second one will be makeup for the morning. Same thing. Ta'a v'lo yitpalel mincha asha shak'ah hachama. Let's say you made a mistake, you didn't daven mincha till after sunset. Yitpalel arvit shtayim. You daven arvit twice. Rishona arvit, Ushniya tashlumei mincha. First for evening.
Shmona Esrei.
Second, only Shmona Esrei. Second for pay up of mincha. Now, here, this is interesting because it's already a new day. According to the Torah, night's a new day. It doesn't make a difference. For prayers, it's all one big continuous cycle. You miss mincha, you can make it up by the next night.
But what about tefillin on Shacharis? If you miss Shacharis and it's already past,
That's separate. You should still put on tefillin.
you should put tefillin for Shema at least.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And then you have in mind to say that you're doing the mincha.
You're going to do the Shemona Esrei.
Shemona Esrei is for the mincha, and then
Second
the
Shemona
one
Esrei is for
the
Shacharis.
previous one that you missed.
Exactly. Ta'ah v'lo yitpalel arvit ad shala amud hashachar. If you made a mistake and you didn't daven evening prayers till the next morning by dawn, mitpalel shacharit shtayim. You daven the Shemona Esrei of the morning prayer twice. Rishona shacharit v'hashniya tashlomei arvit. First for the morning, second to make up for the evening. Now, Eliran's question, halachayu ta'ah v'lo yitpalel lo tefillah zu v'lo tefillah hasmuchala. You missed two. You didn't daven shacharit or mincha.
No. The question was, let's say someone's Arvit, he must say, and it's Chachri, right? But he forgot to, and he's doing Shemona Esrei, but he forgot to say the second Shemona Esrei for Arvit. Then what?
Oh, then that's it. You missed it.
Oh.
Yeah. But if you miss two davenings, eino mishalem or mashlim ela achrona bilvad. You can only make up for the last one. Ketzad. How does this mean? Ta'ah v'lo yitpalel lo shacharit v'lo mincha. You made a mistake. You didn't daven, not the morning, not the afternoon. Mitpalel arvit shtayim. You still daven evening service twice. Rishona arvit. First one for the evening obligation. V'achrona tashlumei mincha. And the second one will be for makeup for mincha. V'al shacharit en la tashlumin shekvar avar zmana. The morning prayer has no makeup because the time already passed. V'chen b'shar tefillot, and the same thing would be applied for all the other davenings. However, besides for musaf, musaf has no makeup, and musaf also can't be used as a makeup. So if you're on Shabbat, right, you forgot shacharit, you can't say I'm going to do musaf twice. Or if you forgot musaf, you can't do mincha twice, because musaf has no makeup. Halacha yud aleph. Hayu lefanav shtei tefillot. What if you had two prayers to make up, or to daven, shel mincha v'shel musafin? It's after midday, so now you can do both. You can do mincha and you can do musaf. The time for both has arrived. What do? Mitpalel shel mincha v'achar kach mitpalel shel musafin. You do mincha first, and then you do musaf, because it's more common. However, v'yesh mishem moreh, there are some that rule she'eno sin batzibur ken, that if the community ends up davening shacharis late, and now it's time for musaf and for mincha, you do musaf first, kadesh lo yitu, so they don't make a mistake in future times and think that mincha is before musaf. But if you're alone, ideally you should daven mincha and then you daven musaf. That's exactly it. More frequent comes first. So musaf doesn't daven every day. Mincha davens every day. Mincha time comes, you have to do mincha.